Hi everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Green Shoot series. If you're wondering, are you sure this is the Green Shoot series? Where's Pat? Where's Becca? Don't worry about it. Okay, they'll be back in normal service at the next Green Shoot series. Today we have a very special payment session that was curated specially by the office that I come from, the Payments Development and Data Connectivity Office. And I'm your host and moderator today in our very nice studio here with all our panelists here as well. So today we are talking about payments, e-commerce and cross-border payments. I'm joined by three payment giants, MasterCard, PayPal, and Revolut, to discuss the impact of COVID-19 and emerging trends for cross-border commerce. Now, this has been a oversubscribed event. You know, over 1,400 participants have registered to join us from over 60 countries. So as we move through the discussion, please do add your post your questions in the Q&A functionality. And towards the end of the program, we'll do our best to address the most interesting of them. Now, so let's jump straight in and welcome our illustrious speakers, please. So first up, we have James. So James is the newly appointed CEO for Revolut Singapore. And when James was a child, he wanted to be an astronaut, which is a popular choice for all you Green Shoots fans. You will know that a lot of our Green Shoot speakers actually wanted to be astronauts, so you're very good company. Welcome, James. And next up, we have Cameron McLean, whose childhood ambition was to be a professional rugby player for Australia. And there's still time for that, I think, Cameron?
No, I don't think so.
So in his spare time, he is a senior VP for the international markets at PayPal. So welcome, Cam.
Thank you.
And last we have Ari Shaka. And there wasn't a particular career that you said that you aspired to when you were younger and you just wanted to be happy. At first I thought that, okay, that's great. It means that you definitely have achieved your ambitions. And then your two friends here said that might be the hardest to achieve. Nevertheless, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. So for that Yoda moment,
thank you.
Great ambition, Ari. So next up, I think let's discuss today's theme, which is cross-border e-commerce. And it's especially timely because businesses are grappling with the impact of COVID-19 and many firms must transform to ride out this storm. So today we thought that we'll talk about three broad topics: how the pandemic has changed consumer and merchant behavior, how businesses can better leverage on e-commerce to survive and thrive, and what role payment solutions will play in the post-COVID new normal. So we have heard on the first topic that COVID-19 has accelerated the shift from physical retail to digital retail. And with movement restrictions in place and absence of leisure travel, more of us are shopping online. So guilty as charged. You would have thought that this year, without all the holidays, I would be able to keep my household expense, to its lowest, but that has not happened. So you're the experts. Maybe you could share with us more insights on this. So what has the data been telling us about the impact of COVID-19 on consumer behavior? Ari, would you like to share?
Thank you, Joe. I think we live in unprecedented times. I think, firstly, what I'd like to say is that we've gone through a complete period of collapse as countries across the world have gone into a lockdown stage. And I think what we've really seen through the data is some very interesting trends on a number of fronts. One, as you would imagine, that the essential spending category has kind of sustained through this collapse period. People need to get groceries, they need to get on with their basic lives. And even there, I would argue that in the essentials, you've seen physical sales plummet in the initial periods through the lockdown. And e-commerce has been a channel that many have adopted in order to get their essential spending going. The next category is a broader category on discretionary. And discretionary, I would argue, as you rightly said, is anything in the physical world has obviously seen a massive collapse in spending power. And what has happened is, as we've all been in our homes, you're still spending discretionary on e-commerce. So some fairly big ticket spends continue to happen on e-commerce. You've seen the Apple results. I think a lot of people have ordered Apple products through the lockdown. You're seeing a lot of shift in what we call digital consumption behavior that consumers are doing, being in a lockdown stage of e-gaming, e-sports, food delivery, which is another big category that has come up. And therefore, what you're really seeing is that one's trying to grapple with all these shifting trends, and businesses that have not had any form of what I call digital or e-commerce presence have really had to, scramble and scramble hard. And I'm sure Cameron will talk more about that. And we've seen it here in Singapore, we're seeing it in ASEAN, we're seeing it in India, that being caught off guard by not having any form of digital presence has been a big wake-up call for most businesses. So omni-channel is no longer just a luxury or it's an imperative. And therefore businesses really have to move forward to capitalize in a post-COVID world.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think on the digital front, obviously PayPal has a global digital payments platform, and we see across all our markets, huge volume shift and, a correction from sort of the collapse when, societies went into lockdown, and huge changes towards digital services and commerce. I mean, we've seen the rising sectors like, e-learning, e-health, e-pharmacies, online groceries, people really getting by with a new way of engaging these digital services, obviously social platforms. But we see it in our numbers. In the Q2 numbers for PayPal, we had a record number of global new users to the platform, so 21.3 million users, and that was up 143% for that quarter year on year. So what that really is showing, though, is that everyone's engaging with new services and ordering remotely. And our biggest user group is actually people globally over the age of 50. So it's, you think the millennials are very au fait with mobile commerce. Actually, as people have gone into lockdown, they've really tried new experiences, new services. And what's really remarkable, and I think Singapore sits in the middle of a lot of this, is the cross-border trade opportunities for businesses. And not surprisingly, the big export markets, whether it be China, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, into key corridors for PayPal, such as North America, Western Europe, UK, Germany, really what we're trying to provide is a digital platform that can connect buyers and sellers around the world. And as people have been in lockdown, we've seen record numbers through that lens, and as people start to trade more actively remotely. And running a global platform, we have to think about, well, what does it take for sellers? Because obviously with that lockdown around the world, with less flights, order fulfillment has taken longer. So we've actually proactively moved on things like our seller policies, so that if order fulfillment takes longer, we're obviously not disadvantaging those businesses that are trying to export to the world to connect to customers. We've had to be quite empathetic to our network to make sure it works through, extraordinary times and changes in logistics and patterns within consumption, online consumption. So it's been a really interesting time for PayPal, but the numbers are really strong, and that's because people are transacting more and more often electronically.
Over 50s, that's interesting.
I'm almost there. So no, it's really it's a really extraordinary time, and I think that puts pressure on us as global payments providers to actually provide that trusted platform. Yeah. A lot of our we've got a huge partnership with MasterCard. Obviously, people can fund their PayPal wallet in many ways, and Revolut's a rising partner of ours, both in Singapore and obviously in Europe. So it's really exciting to see how consumers are shifting very quickly to find the products that they want around the world using global platforms. Indeed. Such as PayPal.
Yeah. And James, any thoughts on this?
I would very much support that, yes. So in particular, Ari's observation, we've actually seen those people who continued to spending more. Right. And some very interesting categories. So if we were to look at exercise, for example, in a lockdown situation, we're seeing 200% growth in spending, e-com spending on apparel and on footwear and so on. Also on the health, on the non-medical side, on the health side, we're seeing a 50% jump in spend in pharmacies. So people's behaviors change very, very rapidly when you see that macro environmental effect. What I'm hoping to see is or looking forward to see is some of those trends actually continue as these new habits develop, as new people have come online and they're developing new lifestyle behaviors. And we're hoping to see some of that quite sticky. But also observing, I think, Joe, as you pointed out, that we're not through COVID yet. Right. We're nowhere near the end. And so we're also expecting to see quite a few other behaviors kick in over the next, say, 6, 12 months as people become more familiar with this kind of environment.
Yeah. I think to add to sort of the way consumers are now turning up with cash, you know, not wanting to be used as much, you know, Singapore is a very sophisticated place when it comes to things like QR payments, great new standards being pushed by MAS, such as, you know, SGQR standards. And in places like North America, we've seen a huge shift towards consumers wanting to actually interact through mobile devices. So it's really, you know, for us, it's that interaction between, you know, retailers in the physical world, the omni-channel point that Ari just mentioned. So we've launched a lot of new QR payment services around our major markets around the world. And it's very easy when you live in Singapore to think the world is like that, but actually the world is very different. And connecting people to electronic payments in major markets like the US, we think those trends will continue. People won't move back to, you know, the cash-rich countries like Japan. They're all moving very quickly to electronic payments. So it's a really interesting time to see those trends play out with new devices and new mobile experiences.
Totally agree with, you know, Cameron. One area that, you know, he's talked about QR, contactless payments has seen such a surge through this lockdown period. And there's obviously a big health element as well, right? You know, when you share your plastic with someone, you're worried that, you know, who's touching it and, you know, the multiple touch points you put in a terminal. So what you're really seeing is that the ability to just tap and pay or just hold your device, and I'm seeing it myself, I'm using my Apple phone and Apple Pay a lot more than I did, you know, pre-COVID, because I know that I can just hold the phone on top of the device and my payment gets made, and therefore there's no physical touch. So this concept of no touch being actually high touch for service is clearly something that I think is going to be an increasingly greater, you know, phenomena. Just to give you some numbers, Joe, contactless payments was already on a pretty good growth curve. Singapore was probably trending in that 60+% in terms of penetration of contactless transactions to physical transactions. In the COVID period, that has shot up to over 85 to 90%. And including markets like India, right? India was about less than 0.2% of contactless transactions in the whole market. In the last 6 months, India has trended to about 8%, 9%. Now on a bigger base, that's actually a pretty significant shift. And you're going to see more of this happening where QR, contactless, you know, what we call NFC device-based payments, all that's going to be shaping both merchant acceptance points and the consumer behavior that's going with it.
Yeah, and that point really resonates with me, Ari, because recently, you know, we've been out of the office, but I went back to the Tanjong Pagar area and went to International Plaza because I had some shoes to be fixed at the cobbler. And you know how International Plaza is the last bastion of cash, right? And I went there and I had to pay for, obviously I had to pay for the service. And he pointed me to the SGQR code there. Yeah, my heart swelled with pride. I was like, wow, you're an SGQR, like, you're so proud of you. So, you know, it's heartening to see that happening. And the figures that you quoted out of India, they're really impressive. So yeah, indeed, I think that in certain geographical areas, we're starting to see a really uptrend on this. And yeah, this may be the start of a completely new shift. And to your point earlier, James, about changing consumer patterns and behavior, we were speaking about lunchtime exercise. And so that has showed up in your data.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Not only in the spend on apparel and exercise, but we look at the dip, if you like, in gym memberships. And as restrictions are lifted, almost a rush back. And the pendulum, in our opinion, is swinging far beyond what it would normally be. And what we sense is this pent-up demand being released. And it's occurring in a number of different areas. So one is exercise, one is health. One is just general shopping. So e-com shopping, as distinct from restaurants or other kinds of spend, is the fastest growing category by a long way. And what, as I said before, what that's creating is a new breed of shoppers. and potentially a new set of brands. And as brands, both online and offline, begin to curate experiences in a different way as a result of this groundswell, I think we'll see new winners, new brands, new winning brands emerge and stick with us over the long term. So that's a very positive sign for me. It's a new opportunity for me.
Yeah.
I think we've talked a lot about the consumer side of the house and being locked down and what can you interact with to fulfill your needs in terms of purchasing. But what's really been a big shift as part of the numbers we're seeing is that of the 21 million new customers coming on the PayPal network, 1.7 million SMBs. So, and we see a huge, and I think that, the Singapore government, MAS, has been pushing really well our innovation topics. How do you get people to digitize? And we're seeing record numbers in Singapore come on. So connecting those businesses with customers around the world. And and we're in a time when I think the tools for people are very, user friendly. There's great, e-commerce platforms. A lot of the partners that we work with, whether it be Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento and others, that are really easy to get up and running. And, if you're a local vendor or a local seller, your chance now to actually set up a website on a mobile phone, get enabled, get up and running and find buyers around the world and locally there's never been a better time. So I think it's, we're lucky in that sense that the internet has advanced to a point when this hits, that people could actually move quickly and sort of, really digitize or die in many ways because you weren't unable to connect with your customers or future customers. So that was super important.
Yeah, that's a great point. The digitization opportunity for small business, as Cameron just said, 3 to 5 years ago, if a small business wanted to go online, it was quite, a brain-scratching process of figuring out how do I go online. But I think, as Cameron rightly has said, there's so much development in the space and there's much greater innovation in the last 3 years. You can have a one-stop shop where you get created with a front-end web link and a website with your ability to go online in a matter of days as opposed to months is what would have been in the historical past.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this is a nice segue into our next topic because, it's about how the e-commerce space has evolved. And we know that the Singapore retail sector, I have some data here, was amongst the hardest hit by the pandemic. The data tells us that actually the total retail sales plunged 40% year on year in April. And under these circumstances, so many businesses are pivoting to e-commerce, as you said. And so maybe let's explore this from two perspectives, one from the merchant perspective and the other one from the consumer perspective. So from the merchant perspective, how can, as you spoke to that earlier, businesses digitize and then equip themselves to better navigate this online platform landscape? Because, many of the smaller businesses may not have had that experience before, and this is something completely new for them.
Yeah, I think as Ari said, 5 years ago, it would have been a lot harder to do. And I also think businesses are wise. They're small businesses particularly, they know that they've got to shift and move to keep up with the times. And I think a lot of the government support that's being given around the world, whether it be, like this happened in Singapore, to support local businesses, I think a lot of very smart small businesses have now said, we're going to digitize and we're going to find new markets. And that's reflected in the numbers, the record signups we see, but that's happening all around the world. So very much governments have tried to prop up business. And I think the time has been spent well here in Singapore. I think companies have got access to tools, partner services, software platforms. A lot of it's all SaaS-based now. So, it's all software as a service. It's very easy to get up and running and to try and test and learn. And I think that's been really heartening to see, actually. Particularly, a lot of the tools are very easy to use these days, and you literally can set up websites on a mobile phone. So those things are there. But what's also nice is things like the innovation push that the Singapore government MAS is pushing now to incentivize innovation and to really get Singapore businesses plugged into global platforms is really interesting because that will create more innovation and new ways of doing business. And I think it's kind of, you don't want to just stick with the current business model, you've got to innovate to the future. And like we've seen big export markets, the Chinese merchants do very well to connect across the world. I think now, a lot of Southeast Asia is catching up and really targeting, global customers you know, everywhere. So I think that's a big shift. But the tools are friendly, the tools are easy to use, and you can obviously sign up online for payment services to support your outreach to global customers.
Yeah. Ari?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Cameron said. I think the real opportunity of having executable online presence for small business is here. You know, whether it is taking services from MasterCard, PayPal, talk about their numbers. I think it's a real opportunity that where merchants are now being able to bring, and the other big learning that merchants will have, and they're probably seeing that already, when in the traditional world, you have many channels of engagement with your consumer. You know, they walk by an outlet, you can have a conversation, they see your banner. In a COVID world, where you're really struggling to get eyeballs, your ability to reach consumers needs global platforms. And I think that's what PayPal's bringing to the party. That's what MasterCard brings. And there are many other global platform players who are bringing in. Therefore, your ability to engage, be part of global offers engine, I think that's going to be another massive global opportunity coming down, where small businesses will have the ability to participate and create offers and be able to engage with eyeballs and consumers in a very meaningful way. And I think that's the future, and you're going to see more of that. The consumer side is going to be equally exciting. I think James is going to be a real challenger to traditional banks, who I know that across ASEAN, as we've seen, and many of the other markets, even though they're very developed markets, financial services is still broken when it comes to being digital. And I think that's going to be another massive opportunity, you know, in the coming years.
Yeah, so I think you've come to the right point here about the quantum leap, especially on the consumer side. So I wanted to ask James for your thoughts on the consumer perspective. So how is this evolving, and how has this, do you think that this change is permanent because of this year?
Absolutely. I think permanence is a part of, arises from forming new habits. And there are many, many, many more people forming new habits, whether it's changes in offline behavior, but also changes in online behavior. And I think as we bring more of that experience to the fore, what we need to do is create, well, an experience and emotion that sticks with a customer over the long term. And I think those vendors, as they move online, who create and curate these experiences that are long lasting, that are satisfying for us, these vendors will come to the fore. So to me, it's more than just moving online. I think it's moving online within an ecosystem where you can bring different senses, different products, different experiences to the fore for your customers. Merely digitizing is relatively simple. As we know, there's many tools available, but curating an experience it takes an effort and takes some thinking. And we look at it that way from Revolut's perspective. We look at it as an ecosystem. Not only is it a great app, not only is it fast, not only is it high value, but it's also a pleasant experience. It's also a curated experience when it comes to particularly our business side, where you're able to interact with a vast network of people who love the application, people who contribute value to the ecosystem, and people who contribute to improvements over time. So to us, it's not a fixed point in time. It's not a simple act of moving online, but it's part of becoming a new world, creating a new experience, creating a new ecosystem that we can all thrive in. And that has accelerated to, in my mind, this is the key change that we're seeing right now, is this dramatic acceleration in the creation of those experiences and the building out of these ecosystems.
Yeah. And actually, when James was talking about that, I also thought about my experience as a PayPal customer, for example, which I have been for years and years, because, you know, I love shopping. So when you check out and you see that the merchant accepts payment by PayPal, you have the assurance that your data is being looked after securely. So from a customer perspective, could you share how that's important to that whole experience?
I think it's great that James is what he's talking about really is the digitization of a lot of these, the needs to actually get up and running with new accounts or new services. And I suppose PayPal really was 20 years old now as the original sort of fintech when it comes to digital services and changing an industry. What's really interesting for us is obviously the new users, the fastest growing group is that over 50s around the world. And I think, you know, need creates change in behavior. And, you know, even as unfortunate it is with the second waves sort of hitting in different parts of the world, we continue to see that shift. So I really, truly believe that the 3 months, really that intense 3 months of sort of COVID lockdowns in many of the major markets has probably transformed digital commerce 3 to 5 years. And I don't think that's going back. I think, you know, Ari's point at the start around omni-channel, which is really the digitization of services and offerings, continues. And, you know, it'll be the trust that you believe in that transaction, whether it be through a mobile device, a desktop, in person with, say, a QR payment. You know, it's fulfilling those services. So I think, you know, digitization is what's really changing rapidly, and new users have a high bar of expectation. They want things to be simple. And I think the people that provide the services that are simple, that provide the trust, will continue to grow, you know, and with new user groups like the over 50s that we saw in our recent numbers.
So Joe, one of the things that I think is going to happen increasingly, like 5 years ago, if you were to take the paradigm of frictionless consumer experience and safety and security,
Yes.
everyone would have said, if you want safety and security, you've got to give up a little bit on that frictionless experience. And you've got OTPs, you've got all kinds of, you know, tokens and other things that you need to carry with you. I think technology has now got to a stage where it's not an either or equation. You can get completely frictionless experience with the highest sort of safety and security. And technology, just to give you a sense, a global standards on tokenization is a massive enabler for safety and security. Things around AI being used in the way you will gauge and risk score transactions and consumer behavior is again going to be a major enabler for reducing friction in that consumer journey. You know, MasterCard's making a lot of investment in this space. So things like how you hold the phone, how do you type, the errors you make, which finger you type with, the pressure you put is creating a unique impression for every individual consumer. And I believe that's where the next wave will come, because, you know, you can imagine a world of 60 billion or 100 billion connected devices in the next 3 to 4 years. But if you haven't built that safety environment, the trust that Cameron and James were both talking about will implode, and you're not going to be able to deliver that service. So I really feel that this is a point in time. There are so many vectors that are coming together. And I think that's all really positive for a rapidly shifting, you know, digital economy.
And I think that security, that trust is now starting to be built into the environment and built into the infrastructure, Ari, to the point where you don't notice it anymore.
Right.
And it becomes very seamless, very easy to use, and embedded in every aspect of it, such that you are operating in a very high quality, highly secure environment, but you don't notice it.
You just don't know it.
Yeah. And that to me is a fundamental shift. As you said, in prior years, dongles and tokens and all sorts of other devices and ways and means of accessing the internet was an impediment.
Yes.
And there was a fear, I think, associated with that. And a lot of that fear has evaporated, which makes the journey that much smoother and that much more fungible with what we're used to in our offline life.
Yeah, just one point on that. With the record volumes becomes record numbers of bad actors trying to access the networks. And I was very lucky to recently talk to one of our top data scientists in our Israel office in Tel Aviv. And just the number of new data points, you know, the mobile centricity, the hundreds of checks, and to Ari's point, you know, it's biometrics, but a lot of checking that needs to happen pre-authorizing a transaction in a millisecond. Yeah. Puts huge burden on the platforms, and that, you know, without that, you lose trust, because more fraudulent transactions that come through, really the buyer and the seller start to lose that confidence. So I think that's a big shift for the digital platforms. It's not just, you know, kind of all just happening to us. It's the enablement of that trusted layer that's really important. You know, what funding source are people using? You know, have they got experience and a track record with a platform like PayPal? Can they be trusted? How do we expand our network? You know, recently partnerships with Gojek in Indonesia. How do you access new users which have a very different behavior into a global platform that is PayPal and have the same sort of risk rules that actually, well, broader risk rules to actually make the network safe and secure? So you know, it's a burden, but it's something that we stand for, and we want to, you know, keep that network safe and secure.
Yeah, and on that point, actually, it's very opportune that we talk about the future of payments, because, you know, we all shop at different places for different things. When shopping for my upcoming newborn, and just using her as an excuse to buy more things. But every retail experience ends with the same thing. It's called a payment transaction, right? So when it comes to payments, we have seen an explosion of payment services in the recent years. So how will the pandemic change like payment solutions and the payments landscape? So let's go to the audience poll to find out, right? So we're having an audience poll right now. Please look at your screen. So in your view, what will be the major trend driving evolution of payments in the post-COVID world? Given you some keywords to choose from. Very interesting if we could hear from you on that. But while waiting for those results, so what role do you see payments playing in, say, the post-COVID new normal? And how do you think businesses and retailers can track and stay abreast of the developments? Maybe you start again.
Yeah, I think it really comes back to that first term that Ari used, which was really omni-channel, which has been talked about for a very long time, but truly digital services and the way people consume today is blurring, and even more so. I mean, you can do most things from your mobile phone today because retailers have kept up with consumer demand. I think there's that sort of paradigm of those things coming together and a sort of blurring of physical and digital. And that's what we see in the numbers, and why we're pushing hard on things like the QR experience, particularly in places like the US, which are kind of a little bit backward when it comes to, you know, a cash-heavy market, and, you know, the services being taking those consumers into the future. So I think every market is different. I think the interoperability point is a really important one, because retail will merge. You'll have different experiences that connect to fulfill consumer demand. And, you know, there's a lot that happens there. And I think, but ultimately, you know, everything comes back to the digitization and the platform that creates those experiences in the physical and the digital world. So I think that's the blurring, the omni-channel piece that Ari first talked about.
I tend to agree completely with Cameron. I think interoperability and, you know, the key thing for any payment service provider is, you know, we come back to that very cliche term, the customer is king. Don't try to tell the customer what they need to do. And I'm here using customer in a broader definition. It could be the merchant, it could be the consumer who's shopping at that merchant place. Having presence across multiple channels and be able to offer that in a seamless manner that your consumer that comes in can pick any of that is going to be very key. I'll give you an example here. It's already happening in Singapore, and this is the post-COVID world. I was at Paragon, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, and at one of the cafes, just was grabbing lunch. I realized that there was no menu at the cafe, and you had to scan a QR code. The menu is in the app in the site that opens up. So I've not downloaded an app. I order through that site. I have an opportunity to put a card on file on that site and get seamlessly served. And, you know, as we all know, we see in the retail space, and this is going to be a big efficiency driver for the retail operator, especially in food and beverage. From the time a consumer finishes a meal and finally pays the bill, on an average, it's 10 to 11 minutes. So if you're in a high, fast-moving environment, if you're able to release that time and be able to serve more people, can actually be a massive enabler for business growth and efficiency. So I think you're going to find this play itself out, where digitization is going to become an enabler for business and efficiency in a much more meaningful way. And at the same time, you know, make it very much more convenient, where you're not waiting around to be served. So I think these are all the positives, I would say, that, you know, COVID is delivering.
That's really something that I've observed as well, the QR code at the side of the table. And in fact, when I said earlier that every retail experience ends with the payment transaction, now actually the payment transaction might come earlier. Because likewise, I think recently I just stood up and left from my table, which is a really surreal experience for me, without just bypassing the cashier, because payment was already taken.
So we have, although we are from the payment industry, we
Yeah.
use a line very frequently.
Yeah.
Nobody gets excited about making a payment. But I think what James said is the curation
Yeah.
of an experience is the real magic.
And in fact, I would take it even further, Ari, as the payments disappear and become hidden, the meta of the payment becomes much more important. So creating an experience or adding value to the payment itself, but hiding the payment. So we're making a payment for shipping some goods from overseas. How do I find the most efficient route? What else can I add as value to the payment, to the end of the payment there, to make it more valuable to you as a consumer or as a business, and hide the payment behind our trust, hide the payment behind our efficiency, and of course cost as well. And that to me is the future, being able to find the additional meta, the additional value that we can bring to those payments and the ecosystem and the network around that will differentiate or make payments, if you like, almost hidden, but absolutely integral to your satisfaction as a customer in the future.
Indeed, yeah. So shall we take a look at what the audience has decided from the audience poll? Let's pull that up. You know, you were talking about interoperability, right, Ari?
Yes.
So let's have you start with that for a reaction to audience poll. Yeah.
Well, I'm delighted. I think the consumer is telling us something, right? Interoperability is important. And, you know, if I look at, you know, where at least we are heading as a company, we have taken on a massive, and we're putting billions of dollars to it, is what we are calling a multi-rail strategy, where we've got both account-to-account payment capability, we have card-based payment capability, and the linkages between the two is going to be critical, as James was talking about cost in global trade. When you have real-time payments capability and you'll be able to push and receive payments at the blink of an eye, and hopefully at the fraction of the cost that businesses pay today under, you know, correspondent banking, pricing norms, will be a massive, massive enabler for business and trade. So I'm delighted that, you know, many of the things that we discussed is being recognized in the audience poll as well.
Yeah, and it is a clear winner. And you know, interoperability is so close to our hearts. For so many of the payment rails that we hope to build and develop here at MAS, interoperability is topmost of our minds. We try to make sure that our infrastructure is open and accessible. So any thoughts on that?
Well, that was the one that I naturally gravitated to, interoperability, because if you look at global platforms like PayPal, whether you've got bank-heavy markets, funding markets like Germany or Japan, where, you know, consumers want to experience and fund transactions a certain way, what interoperability brings is actually the buyers and sellers together in a common format. And I think the great thing, the proactive governments, the MAS push around SGQR, that actually takes a lot of the standard issues out of the equation, and then the players can actually rally around particular standards, which I think is really progressive. And, you know, it's what industry needs, because the quicker that can happen, the benefits flow to all sides of e-commerce, and the digitization, the bringing together of different forms of payment in different experiences really comes together much quicker. So I think that's really great. And, you know, that's I think what you said is fantastic.
So Joe, just to build on Cameron's point, I think there are some headwinds on that. I think we agree as payment professionals. I think there are some real headwinds, and the headwinds are, I think I hate to say it, I'm sitting here with a regulator, but here is a extremely progressive regulator, but I would argue that there is still a lot of differences between different regulators on how they see this concept of interoperability. Interoperability and having global technology standards, because you're only as good as the weakest link. You can have interoperability, but if you've got interoperability between operating systems that are on different standards, you've got a real problem of safety and security in an interconnected, environment. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen on that front, and recognizing that interoperability with global technology standards becomes an enabler for trade and business, as opposed to necessarily, what we call, championing only national causes, which leads to islands, what we call digital islands, as opposed to really building a global ecosystem.
Indeed. And I think that, James, Revolut would have a real pulse on that. What's your reaction to that?
Look, absolutely. Anything that improves the efficiency cross-border.
Yes.
Anything that brings the cost out cross-border, and anything that improves the reusability cross-border. We find, of course, every payment system that we need to interact with is a completely new start. Country X, country Y, not interoperable. New piece of work, new piece of development, new piece of scoping, and new maintenance requirements on top of that. So your operating costs over a long period of time are just that much higher. And all of that goes into the cost of the consumer and the business at the end of the day. It must be recovered. And so anything we can do, frankly, to sponsor between the regulators, as Ari said, interoperability, sharing of standards, and a common perspective that it's better for everybody's economy at the end of the day, country level, national level, as well as individual businesses and consumers to reach a state of commonality, to reach a state of harmony there.
Yeah, so I think that that's a view that clearly our audience shares as well. Right. And on that note, maybe let's move to some of the more interesting questions that we have, my team here has picked out from the Q&A. If it's possible to show it on the screen, perhaps I'll read it out to you also. Maybe one of them would be, what is the outlook for B2B e-commerce in the post-COVID period? I think we spoke a little bit about it just now. This is also related to another question here about what payment trends will emerge in B2B. So clearly a lot of people interested in B2B commerce space, given that banks are still the biggest providers for B2B payment solutions. Any immediate reactions to that?
I mean, at the heart of any transaction is trust. So B2B is often dealing with much larger transaction sizes, dollar amounts. Yeah. But there's super innovation we see in the small business sector. So, traditionally the area of being called sort of drop shippers, and what those companies do is find consumer demand and then procure it and bring it together and basically fulfill. So that's, in many ways, they're doing a B2B transaction with a wholesaler, with a manufacturer, and then packaging and sending that product around the world. I mean, B2B as an area is obviously huge, and comes down to that trusted transaction level. But I don't see that slowing down. I see that, with the digital world and people moving to digital services in a much bigger way, the B2B, the value chain, will actually move further up. So the wholesalers will probably move further towards the consumer. There'll be a change in the sort of in the supply chain. So I think it's going to come together even tighter for the consumer. The consumer will ultimately win because there'll be better services for them in the mainstream. But obviously B2B payments is a very, it's a highly complex area, particularly cross-border. But, seeing that, we've had record cross-border volume in Q2 of 37 billion, that's a huge amount that we see in our network. And, a good proportion of that is B2B. It's about connecting those people in the supply chain and providing that trusted level.
Your experience as well?
Completely. I think B2B is, I hate to call it the final bastion, but there's a lot that's happened on the consumer side. But I really feel that there is a massive opportunity for disruption in the B2B space. It's costly, it's broken, it's time consuming, it is opaque. If I am selling you something and I'm waiting for my payment to come in, till the time the money doesn't come into my bank account, I have no idea where is it in transit. And even after the money arrives in my bank account, I'm not sure what exactly did I get paid for, right? With all the commissions in the chain. Yeah. And if you decided that, the goods I sent to you, only 80% was good and 20% you weren't paying for, that's another level of complexity, both for businesses, because, there's reconciliation and other challenges at the back end. My sense is there's a huge opportunity here. And we are certainly looking at this in a very aggressive way. And the challenge, though, is that scalability of bringing solutions in the B2B space to work at an individual business by business level is a really difficult proposition. So what you're really having to work is aggregators on both sides, what we call buyers payment agents, sellers payment agents, who are actually connected to ERP systems, especially for bigger B2B payments, and then be able to bring in efficiency and transparency is going to be a very massive play. Not to forget that I think blockchain is going to be another massive enabler of efficiency and transparency in B2B payments. And I'm sure PayPal, others, and we're all looking at a number of plays in that space.
Yeah, there is indeed the next question here on blockchain. Let's hold that thought for a bit. Maybe invite James to also contribute to.
Yes, absolutely. I agree completely with Ari. And in fact, that's exactly how we see it at Revolut. So with our Revolut for Business products, curation of a trusted ecosystem is absolutely integral to that. The partners who are locked in, the partners who opt in, and then the customers. Once you become a customer in this network, you become part of an ecosystem of trusted suppliers, of trusted payments, of transparency, as you're saying. I know where my money is, I know where my goods are, and I know when I'm going to get it and when they're going to arrive. And I think that's, again, part of this curation that I was talking about earlier. Those experiences from a business perspective will allow businesses to adopt this faster and in a more confident manner. We are talking about much larger sums of money and very diverse parts of the world. And as we can't travel, it's very hard to build some of those relationships sometimes. And they do ebb and flow over time. But when you've got a trusted network and a trusted partner in the middle of that, I think it makes for a much more smooth world, a much more performant world, and frankly, lower costs for everybody.
Yeah, so those are really good insights, and brings us to also the next two sets of questions. I thought this one was quite interesting about stable coins and whether payment processors will lean towards adopting CBDC, and you were talking about blockchain earlier. So how do you think that development is going to drive your business or change the way that you're doing business? Maybe Ari?
So I think, Joe, I think a lot is happening in this space, but I think the only thing that I keep asking in any forum, including inside MasterCard or when we deal with our partners, what problem are you really solving? Because I think blockchain and cryptocurrencies and things have had so much publicity that it's almost become the end in itself. And one really has to be careful. What's the problem statement? Where does it get applied? My sense, quite honestly, is, and we're obviously all learning on this journey, I think there is a role for national digital currencies and what we call stable coins, which are backed by regulatory mandate, as opposed to Bitcoins, which are outside of the regulatory regime. I think there's a clear opportunity there. And I think it is really in the B2B payment space, which is more broken and needs a fix. I'm not sure that, I'll be using, a stable coin to pay for my Starbucks or pay for my, grocery bills. Because as a consumer, what I have works really well, works well for the merchant, works well for me. So the incremental value that this might bring is probably superficial. So I think, again, if we stick with the problem statement, I think you're going to find very credible and very significant use cases, as opposed to just getting deflected in some minor cases, and therefore the significance of the technology and capability might actually be undermined.
Understand. And same sentiments?
Absolutely, I would agree. I think at a national level, coins, Bitcoins are, as people have coined very often, a solution still looking for a problem. And whilst I'm a big fan of crypto myself, I still don't see the dramatic cost savings, and I still don't see the brand new use cases, the genuinely innovative use cases for coins at a national level. I hope to be surprised, and I hope to be impressed in the future, but I don't think it's there yet today, Joe.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think there's often, this point of interoperability, that the term blockchain and, Bitcoin and other things are often interdispersed, right? And ultimately, I think B2B is a great space where that blockchain technology has a lot of, where it's sort of knowing that the goods have come in, the bills of lading, it's digitizing supply chains. There's huge opportunity for blockchain in that space. I think with everything going on in the world around currencies, reserve currencies, the US dollar, other countries rising, there's a need for that stable coin kind of concept, I think, because swings and roundabouts in foreign exchange, a lot of things, what's the underlying backing of a stable coin. So I think as the transactions get bigger, often global trade's denominated in US dollars, you know, there's a need to actually modernize a lot of that space. And I think that's where we're going to see the green shoots. But the speculation around, you know, things like Bitcoin, obviously it's a finite thing, which has an underlying cost, you know, the ability to generate new coins. So there's an economic, you know, sort of a denominator there, but it's about a finite, a lack of, you know, a finite number of coins. So, but stable coins and backed by national systems is a lot ways analogous with, you know, something like the US dollar, which backs a lot of the global trade that happens today. So we will see innovation. It'll probably be more in B2B than B2C to start with, like the team has said, and that's probably where we'll see the green shoots, I think.
Yeah, and I like that you ended with the green shoots reference, because that's exactly what we're going to go to next. And you know, with every green shoot session, we have our green shoots moment. We ask our speakers to share, you know, something uplifting during this year, because this year we're in an unprecedented crisis. So it's good to share some good news, uplifting moments. Start with James.
Well, I think we've surprised ourselves, Joe. I think we've surprised ourselves at how quickly we can change, how quickly we can put aside procrastination and bureaucracy and just get on with it. And in my mind, I'd like to see this retained, so that as we come out beyond the end of COVID, as we get vaccines and as we get easy, effective treatments in place, we retain that ability and we apply that to a new world, to a new concept that we haven't yet reached, so that we have a greater ability to shift ourselves environmentally and shift ourselves socially forward. To me, that's an exciting opportunity. I think we've demonstrated something to ourselves that we didn't know we had the capability of. I'd like to see that. For me, that's the most exciting part of this.
That's good insight. And Cam?
So mine really is a family story, actually. Through the circuit breaker, through the lockdown, we as a family decided, and part of PayPal's push with employees, obviously wellness, and one of the only activities you could really do was exercise, you know, during the day. So I've got a 4-year-old and an 11-year-old, and my wife and I, we started off cycling 10 kilometers. My daughter is only learning to cycle. She went on the back of my wife's bike, and we continued to cycle every day, sometimes 3 times. And we said, well, what are we going to do to make a difference? So we raised some money, a decent amount of money, for the construction workers in the dormitories, which were going through a huge impact here with COVID-19 and continue to have challenges. So we ended up cycling 2,500 kilometers around and around Sentosa Island. So I know every turn on that island. But what was really nice was the fact that my daughter, who turned 4, was able to actually ride her bike at the end when the opening happened, and we did sort of the 10 kilometers with her. So she got sick of sitting on the back of my wife's bike, I think. But no, that was so I think you can do a lot with an adversity. You can change the narrative. And for us, it was, what can we do to positively come through circuit breaker and sort of position ourselves for the rest of the year. So that was my green shoots moment.
Yeah, so not national rugby player, but really coming very close to that with all the cycling.
Well, I try, but no, it was a great thing to do, which gave us a focus which was beyond homeschooling and homeworking. So that was great.
And that's the Sentosa guide there.
Very inspiring indeed. And I think a very similar theme. I think there's a lot of suffering through COVID. Let's keep in mind what number of families that have been affected, numbers of people who've died. This is a grim period. But I must say that, if I have to think of a green shoots moment for myself, I feel and I hope that this sustains. I see a lot more caring society. And what do I mean by that? Right at the start of this pandemic, we as a company took a call, and I know many others have done, so we're not just the exception, that nobody is going to be laid off because of COVID, because there's enough suffering around us. And having taken that, and then just to see how the employees have rallied from working from home, and we haven't missed a beat with respect to going after business opportunities, and at the same time, I think as leaders, the onus on us to engage with our employees and stay connected has really shown that they have, as James was saying, our ability to reinvent and raise the game. I'm just amazed. The human spirit is so powerful, The only other thing that I tell a lot of people is let's just help local communities and local businesses. I think everybody needs help. Every little bit that we can do is going to help bring back all our communities and our countries back into 2021. And I think it's not the government's job only. It is all our jobs to do that.
Yeah, and thank you. And on that very inspirational note, I'd like to thank wonderful speakers here today for sharing all your valuable insights. And to the audience also for your very good questions. I think we had a fabulous time today. Thank you so much. And well, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to a close of this session, but I'll be hosting another session on 10th of September on cryptocurrency. So we heard a little bit about blockchain. You've heard the fiat side of the house. Do you want to hear about the cryptocurrency side of the house? That's coming to you on 10th of September. And I have a superstar lineup for you. Let's hear from Dante Desparte of Libra Association, Mike Kayamori from Liquid Group, and Tyler Winklevoss from Gemini. So this is a lineup you don't want to miss. You can register and join us using the QR code on your screen right now. Yeah, and we really look forward to seeing you at the next Green Shoot session. Not to worry, your favorites, Pat and Becca, will be back at the next Green Shoot session, and I'll see you again at the next Payments one on 10th of September. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a fabulous weekend.